We have the first daylight images now of the aftermath at the hospital blast site, the video and the photos coming to us from the Reuters news agency. The Gaza Health Ministry, which is controlled by Hamas, now says that 471 people were killed there and now claims that nearly 3,500 people have died since the conflict began October 7th. Hamas blames Israel for the hospital blast, saying it was due to an Israeli airstrike. Hamas is also responding to Biden's remarks, calling him, quote, blindly biased in favor of Israel. Meanwhile, Biden has not said yet whether U.S. intelligence agencies are backing up Israel's claim. And this morning, we're learning from UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak that British intelligence services are also independently analyzing the evidence. Some of that evidence comes from what we're seeing here. Most of the damage appears to be outside the hospital. And in a briefing this morning, the Israeli military points to this fact as backing up its assertion that it was that failed rocket launched by Islamic Jihad that caused the blast. Senior international correspondent Margaret Evans, part of our CBC News team in Israel, and she's leading off our coverage from Jerusalem. That deadly hospital blast in Gaza City, Margaret, we obviously want to begin there. And let's listen to, with your reporter's ear, what are Israeli officials saying about the blast and who was responsible?
Well, as you've said, Heather, they are pointing the finger at Islamic Jihad. That is another militant group in Gaza dedicated to the destruction of the Israeli state, much smaller than Hamas, much less powerful in terms of its weaponry, but also backed by Iran. So it gives you a sense of the regional dimension to what's going on here. The Israeli Defense Forces have been adamant that they do not, their warplanes do not deliberately target hospitals. They have said they have intelligence sources pointing to Islamic Jihad, that their operations systems show on the ground a rocket or an indentation that the blast hit in a parking lot beside the hospital. They've released some audio that we can't independently verify of what they say or who they say are two militants discussing what happened to the hospital and saying that they thought it was a rocket that had been launched from a cemetery behind the hospital. Again, we can't verify that information, but have a listen to what one of the IDF spokesmen was saying about what happened from the Israeli point of view.
According to our intelligence, Hamas checked the reports, understood it was an Islamic Jihad rocket that had misfired, and decided to launch a global media campaign to hide what really happened. They went as far as inflating the numbers of casualties. They understood with absolute certainty that it was a rocket misfired by Islamic Jihad.
Whether they determine ultimately who is responsible or not, Heather, I think that the Israeli denials are probably not going to be believed on the Palestinian street. I think that you can count on that. That's partly because emotions are so high here. And you've seen, for instance, IDF spokesman earlier in the week denying that there is a humanitarian crisis going on in Gaza, even though we see some of those images of people, trying to find water, of the huge kind of pressure on the hundreds of thousands of people who fled the north to the south at Israel's insistence, saying that if they didn't, they would be in harm's way. But again, with nowhere to go, and then finding themselves still seeing airstrikes there in the south. So that's kind of the mood, and you will see that sentiment of distrust is spreading right across the Middle East. There have been protests in the occupied territories today, in Nablus, in the West Bank, real anger, and of course that's fueled by the images that we've seen of the ferocity of the Israeli airstrikes in Gaza, in the wake of that October 7th attack by Hamas militants, very brutal atrocities committed in Israel against Israeli civilians. And of course, in the midst of all of this, we also have the hostages, Israeli hostages, believed to be in the hands of Hamas in the Gaza Strip. So it is a very, very fraught here right now.